Hello, I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory Experimental. This playthrough started in 1.0, and I am now on update 1.1. In this save, I am attempting to load balance all my factories. For some reason, this is what I call fun. To turn 1100 uranium into 750,000 megawatts, I'll be using a good number of alternate recipes. The ones related to the different fuel rod productions are infused uranium cell, uranium fuel unit, fertile uranium, instant plutonium cell, and last but not least, the plutonium fuel unit. There are no alternate recipes for Ficsonium, but I'll be doing the full waste recycle process as well. To recap what parts I already have automated and I just need to bring over: 12 crystal oscillators, 200 electromagnetic control rods, 160 singularity cells, 3200 fixite trigons, 1500 quick wire, 40 rotors, 120 iron plates, and the parts I need to make the pressure conversion cubes. There are a couple more things I probably should have included in the last video, but let's get through them first, then I'll go through the flowcharts and get to building this monster power plant. And to start off today, we are right on the edge of the swamp. There's the train station, there's the first aluminum plant, and you can just barely see the Trigon Tower right there. I guess you can barely make out the other one. That fog is something else. I went ahead and built this, so I am going to run through all of the numbers and we'll go through the flowchart and why I'm making this amount. But I just wanted to knock out some of these real quick before we really dive into the main project. So this little setup right here is going to make 300 silica. I only need 180 raw quartz to do it, and so that's what the miner is set, and then we're just going to send that into 4 constructors. Each of those are clocked to 200%, so each one will output 75. I get a total of 300, and just feed directly into the drone port. Even though it's really not too far, it's far enough that I don't really want to bust it over. What could go wrong with using more drones? Thankfully, I already had power running from the train station up to this area because right over there is where I'm making my extra copper powder that I needed. So I just needed to branch off just one more power tower and just bring it over. And now we can go ahead and just power this thing on. And just like that, we've got 300 silica. So this will back up in a matter of no time, but that's okay because in not too long I'll have the drones set up and I'm just going to have them run for quite a while to make sure the throughput is good. And so anything that we build up on this side, we should have high enough throughput to basically just transfer that buffer over to the other side. Now it's on to the next fun little project. Now it's a fresh new day and we're on the other side of the swamp. So there's the Trigon Tower. Here's the petroleum coke and the factory that's making all that quick wire and iron plates and rotors. So just over here, I've set up this little guy. So we'll get to the top last. So if we take a look at the map, and it's just chaos now, but the closest sulfur and the most convenient would have been this one. Unfortunately, that's impure, and I need 1100 sulfur for this project. And so thankfully, there's a pure node right here, and I can use 1100. And so this is how I'm going to get the 1100 sulfur from here to there. Now the factory is going to take place basically right on the edge of the water. So I could create a bus, but where's the fun in that? I'm using so many drones. What's a few more? But this one, I decided, you know what, I want to switch things up, and thanks to a comment in a previous video, I decided not to run power towers all the way over here. I definitely could have, it probably would have only taken 2 or 3. But because of the huge height difference, I just didn't think it was going to look that great. And the comment inspired me to create this, and I thought it was going to be a fun little challenge. So I'm powering this by drone as well. The only thing I really need to power is the miner and some drone ports. So my fuel generator is clocked to 240%, which will output 600 megawatts. Each drone requires 100 megawatts, so that's more than enough to power that, the miner, the packager, and the sink to get rid of the empty packages. For the most part, my rocket fuel is getting used to power my drones. This is the only thing being powered by the packaged rocket fuel, so I'm just going to sink these extra packages. Empty fluid containers. And the reason why it's clocked to 240% is it'll require exactly 10 rocket fuel per minute. And because you condense it when it gets packaged, I only need 5 packaged rocket fuel per minute to fuel this whole thing. So I felt that was a fair trade-off. And it was just a fun little project. So this right here is my load balancing to get down to 5 because, of course I had to do that. And it finally gave me just the perfect opportunity to use another new item that we got in this update. I found a use for the priority merger. So if you don't use a priority merger, the issue is my drone is just going to continue to bring in more and more fuel until it can't anymore. And so that means that this line is eventually going to fill up because this container is going to completely fill up. And then that means I'll have 60 coming from here, and then I'll have 55 returning from here, because all of this load balancing is to get it down to 5 canisters going into the packager. So that means I'm looping back 55. And then because everything is going to fill up and you're really only using 5 per minute, you're just going to have an issue because it's going to want to send 1 from this side and then 1 from this side. But now with the priority merger, I can set the part that is looping back to the highest priority. So this is always going to get looped back. So this belt is going to be filled up with the 55 from here. And then whenever there's that small gap, that 5 per minute gap, it's going to bring in 5 more from the drone port. And I just thought this was really cool. And I'm super glad that they added this. I didn't know I needed it. Okay, so that's how this whole thing gets fueled. Now let's talk about the rest of it. So I put 3 drone ports up here only because I'm not positive that 2 will be able to do it. So I figured it's easier just to add an extra one. The way the sulfur is getting broken up is out of the 1100, 500 will go to the infused uranium cells, and then 600 will get turned into sulfuric acid. So I'm pretty sure a drone port for each one will be able to do it just fine, but just in case I added the 3rd. But let's take a look how I'm splitting this up. Just needed to do a little bit of load balancing down here. Instead of making a blueprint, I just freehanded this. So I just basically did an 11-way split because I need 500 going one way, 600 the other way. So it's 5 11ths and 6 11ths. And just like the 5-way split that I've done plenty of times, you're basically just going to split it one more way. So in this case, 12. And then we just loop back one of those 12ths into the very beginning. But because this belt is almost completely full, instead of sending it directly into the merger, I need to split it in half first, and then it goes into 2 different mergers. And then with that last 12th that I have, that one gets split in half. Half of it goes to one merger, the other half goes into the other merger. So we're doing a 12-way split and looping one back. So we split this in half, so 6 and 6. 6 would go into here. We split that in half, so here would be 3, here would be 3. We split this one all 3 ways. Here's 3. And then this would be 4 and 5. And this one is the one that gets looped back. But like I said, it goes into a splitter. And then we split it in half. Half of it goes into this one. Half of it goes into this one. And so with this half, it's pretty easy. It just goes right into the merger. And here's the 6. So here's our 600. And here's the 500. And those just go all the way up and into the drone ports. So for now, this one's just going to be extra and see if I need to split the 600. Pretty sure both of them would be just fine, but if anything, it'll be the 600 that needs to get split in half. So the beauty of working with packaged rocket fuel is I can just grab a stack. So if I throw a stack in here, this should last me 20 minutes worth. And that'll give the drone plenty of time to go all the way out to the Spire Coast and grab some more. And that'll keep this self-sustaining little system running. Except for the minor issue that I do need to power on the packager for just a second to get all this running. So a long time ago, I made this blueprint of just 4 biofuel generators for when I went out running and exploring, and it's pretty helpful. Obviously, if you have 10 summer sloops, that'll just give you the 500 power, and it's just probably the easier option to go. But in the early game, I highly suggest building something like this. Each one has something like 5 biomass. Yeah, the whole thing requires 20. So it's been really nice because I can plop it down and then you can also just delete it all in one go, which is really handy. But it means now I can just connect this and it should run for just long enough that we can get that up and running. And then I can delete that and get this connected. I put some more finishing touches, mainly just a whole bunch of windows, but everything is powered on and working. The fuel drone has been going back and forth, and I think it's completely full up now. And the priority merger is working great, and we can get this thing turned on. All right, so let's power this on, and then we can double check and make sure that it's running the way it's supposed to. To get everything to fit where I wanted it, there's no extra belt that I can put it on. So unfortunately, we're just gonna have to check one belt, and then I know that that's putting out 1100. So if this is 600, that means that that one will have to be 500. And there we go. We hit our 600. And that's the Sulfur taken care of. There's still one or two more side projects that I'm going to need to do, but let's start getting into the real project. Instead of looking at the entire factory as a whole, because trust me, that in one flowchart is an absolute nightmare, I'm going to break this down into the three major parts: uranium, plutonium, and the Ficsonium. My plan is to make 12 uranium fuel rods per minute. Now, if you were to just bring in basically the raw resources, this is essentially what the flowchart may or may not look like. There are so many different options with alternate recipes. You can change the requirements by quite a bit, which I love about the game. But as I mentioned, I've already put together a whole bunch of the parts, and so this is what it looks like for me. The ones in gold are the parts that I already have automated. I just need to bring them over. Half of them will be by belt, the other half by drones. And here you can see this is where I needed that 300 silica to go. I've already taken care of the sulfur, so the only remaining piece for me to take care of is the uranium. But I like to leave that one until last, just so I can save my ears from hearing that endless clicking for just a couple more hours. This part of the factory should be fairly easy. Here are the two blueprints I've come up with to take care of the whole uranium process. Let's take a look. As far as the machines go, I need manufacturers to deal with two recipes, and that's pretty much it since I've taken care of so much else. So this yellow one is going to take care of step 1, the infused uranium cell. That'll combine the uranium, silica, sulfur, quick wire into our encased uranium cells. And I know this is a really weird number, and if we take a look at the flowchart, at 100% I would need 20 manufacturers for both of these. But instead, I'm actually going to use 15. And I know that may seem like a really weird number, especially because I've been just completely overclocking just about everything, either to 200 or 250%. But I picked very specific numbers for this factory, and everything is going to work out fantastic. You'll see. So this manufacturer will output my 26 2/3 encased uranium cells. Those are going to come right along here, and it ends right here. And I left myself a half a foundation as a gap. And then on this side, we've got the other half. I guess I left myself a full foundation on this side. It doesn't matter, they'll connect just fine. So in update 1.1, we've got the really cool auto connect feature. And let me tell you, I played around with these blueprints for a long time, and I got them to connect in some really, really cool ways. I am really happy with this new feature. So that's gonna send those just over here and go into our green manufacturer. We take a look at those. This will do our uranium fuel unit. So this is going to create the actual fuel rods. It's going to take the encased uranium cells from the next blueprint over. And then I need my electromagnetic control rods, crystal oscillators, and rotors. And this is overclocked to the same speed. I'll be using 15 of these as well. These will output 0.8 uranium fuel rods per minute. The fuel rods are going to come out from the back. They're going to come up through here, go into the lift, and then these are going to go into this splitter. And which, if you didn't know, we can now place them directly on the roof in update 1.1, which is something that I've been waiting for. The fact that you could do it with the pipeline junctions for so long, but you couldn't do it with splitters or anything, just kind of drove me nuts. Now, if only they could give us an actual ceiling pipeline support so that we could stack these instead of these being the wall supports for the ceiling. I think that's the issue. That I would love to see. But this is a huge step in the right direction, so thank you very much, Coffee Stain. And for this one, because I didn't want it just floating out in the middle of nowhere, it's kind of high off the ground, I decided to suspend it with the cables. So since these act like beams, you can just draw it straight from the ceiling, and then I just put a connector, and yeah, I think it's alright. If you feel like it needs like the beam connector or something to be a little bit more supported or something, you can always do stuff like that. But lots of cool different things you can do now. So the fuel rods will go into the splitter, and then half of them will go up here, and then the other half of the fuel rods will jump over back to this blueprint and then get fed up above to here. And that's the idea with this platform right up here. This is just enough space for one of the power plants. So this will line up just right on the edge of the pattern, which is pretty nice, and I think it'll overlap a little bit on the back, but that's alright. I'd much rather keep this thing basically as small as possible. And so that's kind of the footprint for this whole thing. And this is why I picked the numbers that I did. To use 12 uranium fuel rods would normally take 60 nuclear power plants at 100%. At 100%, these need 240 water per minute. If you completely overclock these, the requirement is 600. And when it comes to power and this sort of a thing, if I don't have to put a full 600 in a pipe, I just won't. So instead, when dealing with these power plants, what I really like to do is just overclock them to 200%. And then the requirement is only 480, which I've never had a problem with. And you still cut the amount of reactors you need in half. So instead of 60, I only need 30. So I need 30 reactors. And that's why the manufacturers are clocked to what they're at, because I need 15 of this blueprint and I need 15 of those blueprints, which will give me 30 of these spots to place those reactors on. And down here is where the water extractors are going to go. And this is where I'm going to do half of the load balancing, because I totally didn't set them all up here at first and then realized that there was absolutely no way to do load balancing for 7 different items in this amount of space doing 5-way splits. So this process is going to get load balanced up here, and this one is going to get load balanced down here. Ends up being pretty space efficient in my opinion. We'll have 2 water extractors, each of them overclocked to 200%, and that'll give me my 480 water, and then those will just get piped straight up to the top. And as far as the waste goes, that's what this one is for. And this is the part that's probably a little confusing until you actually see it placed. I'm going to have 3 rows of 10. All of those initial materials like the uranium and the silica will have to get split between the 3 different rows, which is pretty easy. That's just one splitter. And then from in there, it'll do a 5-way split, because there's only 5 of each different manufacturer in each row. But as far as the waste goes, the waste is actually going to get grouped together going this direction, because for that, I want to group 3 of them together. And so being able to group them going this way just makes a lot of sense. And that's why this is going to get set up like that. And here's the best part, is it'll auto connect with these as well. It's just a really cool set of blueprints. I'm not gonna lie, I even impressed myself a little bit with these. I've already laid out the foundations, although I need to go through and change basically all of them. So I don't want this half foundation. I thought that's how I wanted to lay things out, but no, I don't have enough space in the front to do it like that. So the way it's gonna be is 2 full foundations, and then I'm just gonna have a gap of 3 and then 1 in the back. So I'm gonna have to go through and fix all that, but I wanna show you how these things at least get placed. And then we can just skip me placing 30 of the exact same thing. Alright, so the first thing is we grab the lookout tower. And each of these blueprints are going to be 6 foundations wide. So that means the very center is the 3 foundation mark, right? Each water extractor is only 2.5 foundations wide, so they won't take up the whole width of the blueprint, which is totally fine. But that means if I go from the center point and I go 1 1/4, so to right about here, but we can make sure if we go to that point and then we just nudge it over 2 meters, that would be 1 1/4 foundation. So I'm going to place my lookout tower there, and I have half of it overhanging, and you'll see in just a second why. When I take the water extractor and I hold control, I can get it to snap to the lookout tower. And what I want is the center to line up right with the center there. And then we can lock it in place. I can't nudge it, but I can at least lock it and look at it. And that way it gives me a little bit of a gap from the edge of the foundation. And I've got a nice little gap here in the back. Let's go ahead and place it. And now I can get rid of this lookout. Now what I want to do is overclock this. Like I mentioned, we're just going to do 200%. That'll do 240, which is half of what one reactor needs. Now, normally what you would do is just use your little color picker option and just copy it, and it'll copy everything. Color, the power shards, and the settings. For whatever reason, every once in a while I run into what I'm assuming is a bug. Maybe it's my mouse, I don't know. But it just stops working altogether, and until I reload the whole game, it just doesn't work. So imagine I'm using the color picker here, and then I can just copy all the settings and place another one. And now we've got two. And I thought it would just be easier to go ahead and get those laid out and all the rest of them. So there's 60 water extractors all paired up. Now let me show you the real magic. The blueprints coming together. So this is the second version, but this is part A. So let's spin this around. And it is a little bit tricky since the very middle section is water, but we're just gonna have to nudge it in place. Now, instead of placing it, what I want to do is I want to switch it to default auto connect. Now, you'll notice since there's only one blueprint, none of these belts are going to auto connect to anything. But if I go down below here, ta-da! The auto connect works for pipes and water extractors. How cool is that? Oh, I had no idea that it was going to work this way. I honestly just built it this way so that I could easily connect them because I really didn't think that it was going to auto connect from the machine. I don't know why, but I just didn't. And in case you were wondering, none of these lifts are clipping. They just barely fit right in between the two water extractors. So let's go ahead and place this first one. Oh, that's right. So you do have to click it once, and then that locks the connections, right? So this is my one complaint. If anybody from Coffee State ever sees this, I would absolutely love if you lock it in place and you click it, please just don't unlock the hologram. Just leave it. Don't make me move it all over again. It's so tedious. And I find that I'll forget that I need to click it twice, and then I'll hit another button, like I'll right click or I'll hit Q or, something else that will basically just undo everything that I've done. So that is my one complaint about the auto connect feature. I don't mind having to click it twice, but if it's locked in place, please just don't unlock the hologram. All right, so there's the second one. And now if we switch to the B version, instead of default auto connect, what I want is blueprint auto connect, because now I can get it to snap to the blueprint right next to it. Now, unfortunately, if we lock it in place and go up here, because I'm using beams, I'm pretty sure is the reason, I'm going to have to basically nudge each one of these. And I really should probably delete one of those connectors. See, I erased one of the beams so they weren't overlapping, but I forgot to delete one of the connectors. So I'll have to fix that in the blueprint so that you're not just double placing all of these for no reason. But we just get that placed in the right spot. And then as we can see in here, it'll auto connect the belts, just like I designed it to. And then if we go down below, it'll auto connect the pipes as well. So we can go ahead and click that one. And that's right. We're going to have to do it twice. So we hit H again. And then thankfully we just need to nudge it the 2 meters. So once you have one in place, it becomes a lot easier because you can just get these to snap to the blueprint next to it. But I would still love to see that changed. All right, so I just need to finish this whole row doing that same thing. But let me show you the magic of these blueprints coming together going in this direction. So we start off with A again, because that'll be the first one on this row. Spin it around. Really, once we get it close enough, we can click it once, because we're just going to have to lock it and merge it again, or nudge. And then we make sure we're right in the right spot. Terrific. So again, the water extractors auto connect. And then if we come over here, it'll auto connect these ones. And this is going to take the way. So this very first row, I'm going to be able to just delete this last wall hole. It's obviously not going to have anything feeding in from there. So I'll be able to slightly adjust this one to make it look a little bit better. All right, so now I can click it the second time and now it's placed. And then again, same thing. We just make sure it's spun to the right way. And so here's the interesting thing. If it's not completely lined up, this one won't auto connect. But once I nudge it that 1 more meter, then it's far enough over and this one will auto connect. So you do want to make sure that all of your connections are connecting before you click it that first time. Then we can just look at the blueprint next to it again, lock it in place, and go the 2 meters over. And there we go. So now we've gotten the blueprints to connect to the one behind it, the one next to it, and then when we set up the last row, these will basically have a connection on like every single side. So even though placing them can be a little frustrating for me at times, it's a fantastic feature and I absolutely love it. I just think it needs a little bit more polish. There's the first 30 of the nuclear power plants. I think I might have explained it in a previous video, but just in case you're wondering what those random pink and blue water extractors are, that's the world border. So I wanted to make sure that I could build water extractors out in this whole area because the swamp in the past got a little bit weird with water extractors. And so I just kind of flew out there and then just placed it pretty much right on the line, which also happens to be the world border. So if I go past that line, I'll start taking damage. So that's basically my world border. I just kind of placed those out there. I'll eventually delete them. Just do some real quick math. There's 30 of these and each one is going to generate 5,000 megawatts. So this is going to generate 150,000 for just this section. Not too shabby. In total, these 30 power plants are going to produce 600 uranium waste. Now the way that I've grouped this up is they're in groups of 3 and I have 10 groups of those. So that means I'll have 10 full Mark 1 belts of 60 per minute. Which leads us into the next set of flowcharts. So let's take a look at what we're doing next. Alright, just to give you a little compare and contrast, if you wanted to bring in only raw resources, your flowchart may look something like this. Just chaos. But as we've gone over, I've already done some of the heavy lifting already. And so my flowchart looks a little bit more like this, although I'm going to do some things just a little bit differently. Creating the plutonium fuel rods, for me, is basically 2 major steps. The first one is to take that uranium waste and turn it into the fertile uranium, and then I can combine the other pieces that I already have and create the plutonium fuel rods. And here's the first part of the blueprint I've come up to do with this. So this is going to fit right on top of this little row right here. Because as you saw in the flowchart, I need some water, so I'm just going to set this right on top of the water extractors. And this conveyor wall hole and this conveyor wall hole are at the exact same height. Now the one thing that I did notice in playing around with the blueprint auto connect build mode is it works great if you're using the normal conveyor wall holes. The normal conveyor wall holes work, but if you wanted to use the conveyor wall holes where you can manually place them, one, you can't have it be at the very edge of the blueprint designer, and you still can't lock them, although I'm pretty sure that's something that they've said they're going to change. Which is great because I would really like to be able to nudge them into the right spot. And most of my blueprints for this come all the way to the edge of the blueprint designer, so I haven't been able to incorporate those in as many as I would like. Because I personally just like the way that it looks better. Alright, let's take a look at the actual blueprint. So the first floor, like the other ones, is going to be where the water extractor goes. For this whole thing, I don't need as much though. I'm only going to need 1 water extractor for each one of these blueprints. And because I'm going to have way more space down here, I'm going to be doing a lot of the load balancing for all the different things that I need down here. I have plenty of space. I'm sure it'll fit just fine. Alright, and then for this next floor, let's go through all the different machines. First one is the blender. This one is making my nitric acid. And for each blueprint, it needs to make 36, so they're only ever so slightly overclocked. And that means I need 144 nitrogen gas, and then the water and the plates are easy. For the nitrogen gas, each one of these is going to have its own packager, because I think this will just keep everything just nice and simple for me. Each one will be clocked to exactly what its blender needs, which is 144. Since it's a 4-to-1 ratio when you package them, unpackaging it's the same way. So 36 packaged nitrogen becomes 144 of the gas when it's unpackaged. Pretty nice. And then the empty canisters will output right here, come along, and they're going to join up in a line of mergers. Since these will get all stacked up next to each other. So under here, all the packaged nitrogen gas will get load balanced evenly across all 10 of the blueprints. Then up here, they'll get unpackaged, and then the empty fluid tanks will come along, and then they'll all get grouped together, and then they'll head off into the drones to go back and continue its life of going back and forth between the drone boards. And then the iron plates will get plugged in right here. And then the next one up is going to be a refinery, and this one's going to be doing sulfuric acid, 60 sulfur, 60 water. And this is all the water I need. So 60 here and 36 here. So each of the water extractors are going to be underclocked to only 96. And last but not least, one last refinery, and this is how I'm going to deal with all of the wastewater. You could absolutely create a loop, and in fact I do that later on with the dark matter residue, but for this, I just wanted to make it just as foolproof as possible. And this is how I'll deal with the excess water, is it will immediately get turned into concrete. The concrete will then basically do the exact opposite of what all of the empty fluid tanks are doing, and they're going to go the other direction. And so these will all end up at the back of the factory, where I'll just have a sink and get rid of the concrete that way. And that's basically this floor. So the sulfuric acid, the nitric acid, and the uranium waste are all going to be headed right up here. Right on top of there, I'm going to set this one. So this will take both of our acids, the uranium waste, and then I just need to plug in some more uranium, and this will be using the alternate fertile uranium. I'll be honest, I just now realized that this actually outputs the exact same water that you need. Well, I'm definitely using much more power than you need to. You could create a much better closed loop system than I have, and you could cut out the concrete completely. But you know what? My system works, and I'm certainly not going to go back and change it now. Alright, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find the middle spot, and since I only need one water extractor, this is real easy. Place this right there.
Are you sure that spot makes sense?
That spot makes a lot of sense, Ada. Alright, we can downclock this to 96. Alright, and then in default auto connect. Now with this one, we do need to get it all the way into the right spot, I believe, or else. That's right. Okay, so because it ends in a lift and it's not a belt, it won't do the auto connect. Sure, I think even if I switch this to blueprint auto connect. If I get closer, no. Okay. So this is unfortunately one of the setups that just doesn't auto connect for some reason. So I'll have to manually add this belt, but really it's 10 belts. It's not a big deal. Oh, and of course you got to click it twice. So now I got to lock it back in place. And there we go. And now with it in blueprint mode, it gets a little bit easier. And then I'll just want to make sure I put all the water extractors in first, and that way I can avoid having to place that extra belt, and it makes placing them a little bit easier. But before I do that, let me show you how this one gets put on here and it all gets connected. So there's part 1, and here's part 2. So unfortunately in blueprint mode, it doesn't quite go to the right spot. And this one I could just never quite get to connect right. I think if I wanted to extend this belt farther out this way, it would probably auto connect for me right here. So even though it wasn't connected, it wants the auto connect. This is the thing that kind of drives me nuts and doesn't make any sense to me. It wasn't supposed to do the auto connect. Like when I clicked it the first time, this wasn't here. But now for some reason it wants to add it, but now it can't. So that seems really funny. So for this, whatever reason, it's actually easiest for me just to place in default, and then I'm going to manually do the pipes. And really, part of the reason for that is with so many different pipes, it's not going to pick the same color, unfortunately. Like if it auto-connected that pipe, it would be whatever I have set as the default pipe color. So for right now, any pipes that it would auto-connect are going to be blue. Which I mean is fine, I could just go through and recolor them. But that's one reason why I'm just going to do this blueprint in default mode, and then I can set the color. Like for the nitric acid, I have it as this color, and then that way once they're all set, I can come through, I can pick my horizontal to vertical, and I'll do all 10 of those, and then I'll switch the color, and then come back and do all of the sulfuric acid, and that way I can place it as the right color from the get-go, and just saves a little bit of hassle in my opinion. Alright, and then as for the outgoing water, just going to do the same thing. That's just going to go all the way out here. And then the non-fissile uranium needs a Mark III belt. So we'll just put that there. And that's where the output will go. And then that will head down here, all the way down to the ground floor. and that'll head on to the next set of blueprints. So this right here is purely decorational. I think this is just, yeah, pretty much right over where the smokestacks went, because I didn't want to make this any taller, because it just barely fit the refineries in there. But I really didn't want the smoke to go through the floor. I don't know if it still does, it used to, and that just looks weird. So I figured to try to help cover that up, I would add this whole thing, and then I could add the fans, and I thought it just kind of tied the whole thing together a little bit more. So let me place down 9 more water extractors and 9 more of these blueprints, and then we can move on to the next step. And that's all 10 in place. That will take my 600 uranium waste and turn that into 2400 non-fissile uranium. This is the main blueprint that I'm going to be using to turn all of that into the plutonium fuel rods. So this is going to be more like the very first blueprints, because I'm going to have 2 water extractors, because just like the other ones, those nuclear power plants are going to be overclocked to 200%. So I need 2 of those water extractors also overclocked to 200%. Up here where all the action's going to be, we've got the particle accelerator. So this will take my 120 non-fissile uranium and the aluminum casings and turn it into 16 encased plutonium cells. And those will both be coming from underneath, so I'll be doing the load balancing downstairs. And then that will just get fed into this assembler, which will be using the plutonium fuel unit alternate recipe. This will just need 0.8 pressure conversion cubes. Now if I look at one of the power plants, I can see what the fuel cost is. So for a plutonium fuel rod, now the weird thing is even though I have this overclocked, right, it'll update the water right away. Like if I underclock this, it'll tell me exactly what the water requirement is. But this won't actually change at all until it starts running, or it may never actually update. I think this just always tells you what it is at 100%. Because yeah, if I underclock this, those values are all exactly the same. So at 100%, each one of these would use 0.1 per minute for the plutonium fuel rods. And that's going to be making 0.8. Now each one of these is going to be overclocked to 200%, so they're actually going to use 0.2, meaning that this one assembler can feed 4 reactors. And so for those, I came up with this little blueprint. So I don't need it to go nearly as tall because I won't have the particle accelerator for every one of these. So basically it'll have one of these and then I can put 3 next to it. But if we check the numbers, this is actually only going to use 120. But each one of those blueprints is going to output 240. So one of those blueprints is actually going to feed 2 of these. Next to each one of these major ones is going to be 3 of these, because each one of these can feed 4 total reactors. It'll probably make more sense when it all comes together. But this gives me kind of a place to do 2 things. I can place the water extractors down here, and then these sections right here are going to combine all the plutonium waste. And so when I have 8 in total of these, they're all going to get grouped together and head on to the next set of blueprints. So first things first, this is basically the biggest section. So since one of these feeds 2 of these, which also feeds 3 of these, it basically breaks down to this one blueprint is then going to feed into a row of 8 total blueprints for the plutonium. And we've got 10 rows. So I need to place a total of 80 of these, and each one of these needs 2 water extractors, and that's the first step. I need to place a few more of the kind of guide foundations and a whole bunch of water extractors. Now with these blueprints, I didn't actually highlight, but I made them skinnier, so they're only 5 wide instead of the 6 wide that those are. And the reason those were 6 wide is so that it would eventually fit all of this. These right here are 6 deep, but they're only 5 wide. So they're 1 skinnier than those ones are, so they'll look slightly different with the patterns and whatnot once the power plant's on top. But it's not actually going to start with this one. This is going to start with one of the small ones. Alright, and this is where things get a little bit interesting. So to be able to fit the particle accelerator in the other ones, I needed to lower this floor. And I lowered it just enough to where the light comes through from the water extractor. So that's definitely more clipping than I like. I do not want the indicator lights to show up through all of the floors for all of these water extractors. So I could raise it up just 1 meter, and then the very top of the indicators would just be clipped into the bottom of the floor, and I'm fine with that. But then things are offset by 1 meter, and I don't know how much I really like that. So I'm actually going to do it 1, 2, 3 more. So now it's one full foundation taller than it normally would be. So I'm going to go ahead and place that one there. And so I'm just going to come along and I'm just going to add an extra wall to the bottom of all of these. Because now that this one is placed, I can put this in Blueprint Auto Connect, because I do want this to still connect. Now, unfortunately, this right here, I am not crazy about. And unfortunately, I tried a whole bunch of different ways. I can't figure out a way, unless I wanted to. I could have probably cut the pipe shorter and then maybe they wouldn't have done the auto connect, but then that just leaves me more work for later. So I'm going to go ahead and just place it there, although we got to do it twice. But what I'm most likely going to do is I'm just going to delete these pipes and replace them. So if I have my pipes set as default for horizontal to vertical, because I like this look much better, even when I go to place the next one, it's not going to. I think it uses auto by default would be my guess, and I don't think there's a way to change the pipe mode there. So unfortunately, that's just kind of what I'm stuck with. But I'd still rather it auto connect the belt so I don't have to come back and do that. But that will mean that I'm going to have to come along and I'm going to have to delete the pipes, and then I'll have to go back and replace them. But because I lifted it up the extra 4 meters, I'm going to have to kind of come back and do a little bit of extra work for all of these. Like, for example, now this thing that I had here to kind of collect my power connections is kind of floating, and I don't really like the look of that. So I'm going to bring that all the way down to the floor, and then I'll probably either use a beam connector or the beam support or something like that to kind of tie it all together. So I'm still going to have a little bit more work to do, but that's kind of the price I pay for trying to squeeze in a particle accelerator into the middle of one of these blueprints. So now that we have 3 of them, we're going to go ahead and go to the big one, and we'll go to auto connect. Now with this one, I am going to have to like merge it into place. So we'll have to do that twice. So there's the first one, and then like I said, we're going to need 2 of them. And then we can go back to the short one. And that's the whole front. So I do have 2 more versions of these blueprints that basically just don't have the front on it, because obviously that would look a little bit weird if I had them completely blocked off with just windows inside, I think. I mean, it could. You could absolutely make that look right, but instead I'm just going to do it like this. And then that way it'll be just one big open room that I can do any of my load balancing that I need to do. Because I will need to do some load balancing for the pressure conversion cubes and the aluminum casings. So now I just need to finish placing a whole bunch of these blueprints. And these ones have even less material, so especially these ones here on the side, it's pretty much just a platform. That way we can get our water and everything upstairs, and then our pipes, and then our belt to get all of the plutonium waste onto the next step. And then up here, when I put the power plants down, they'll just barely cross over the pattern instead of being kind of all enclosed in it. But not actually a huge difference. It still fits really well. That's another 80 power plants that are all being run off the Plutonium Fuel Rods. Let's take a look, see what it looks like inside. Here's the 20 particle accelerators and the 20 assemblers that are paired up with them. Not too bad. And then on either side, I've got a huge amount of space. These are all the pipes that'll bring the water up to the power plants and the waste down. And if we come down here, we can just see the endless amount of water extractors. Because of the fog, it really does look like it goes on forever. But all those lifts basically just come down here, run into a merger, and they all get grouped together. So 8 reactors waste will all get grouped together. And then there will be, again, 10 rows of that. There's still plenty of belt and pipe work to do, but I just want to get all of these in place and make sure it all fits. And then I'm going to go back and spend all the time fixing everything up. And this is the last of the blueprints, so all of the waste is going to get grouped together. And then basically we've got 10 of these right here. I was going to do the same thing I did with the other two and show you what it would look like if you were only going to bring in raw resources, but I'll be honest, there was so much and you had to be so spread out to fit it all in. It was just boxes and lines. There was absolutely no text. But I think at this point you get the picture. So this is what I'm working with. I already have the large majority of the pieces, so this should be pretty easy. Now I just need to design a blueprint to put it all together. Oh, and before I show off the blueprint, almost forgot the best part of this whole plutonium section. There's 80 power plants, and they are each producing 5,000 megawatts. So this section right here is going to give me 400,000 megawatts of power. That is awesome. Alright, so I quickly got sidetracked, but let's start running through recipes. So this guy right here is just a little bit too long. So as you can see, that's 6, and it's just over 6 foundations. Meaning it doesn't fit normally like this. Now, that being said, what you can do is I could take like a 1 meter foundation and I can rotate it 45 degrees. And now if I place it and grab a quantum encoder, I can fit it diagonally in here. So yes, you can fit these in here. But for me, I'm just not going to try. We're just going to plop this thing on the very top. Because honestly, it's got that cool ray that's going to shoot out the top, and I want to see it. So we're definitely not covering this thing up. So just having to place them on top isn't the end of the world for me. Now in the flowchart, it showed that I needed 32. But I'm going to overclock these to 160%, so each one will produce 4. And this way I only need 20. Alright, so as you can see, electromagnetic control rods, I'll be bringing in those by drones. I made those last video. Excited photonic matter. That is the easiest thing in this game to make. It just costs power. So this right here is what I need a blueprint for. We need to make some Ficsonium. And this is probably the blueprint I spent the most amount of time on, seeing if I can get all of this to fit in here. And in a way that I liked. So let's take a look. Since I lifted this whole thing up by basically one foundation, this conveyor is coming in at the 3rd wall height. And so that's where this one is. So these should be able to directly connect. And that's how I'm going to get the plutonium waste in here. So the plutonium waste is going to head straight on into the particle accelerator, doing the Ficsonium recipe. Each of these reactors will output 2 waste per minute. So since there's 8 in a row, that's going to give me my 16 a minute that this thing requires. I'll be bringing in the singularity cells, so I'm just going to need a load balance across all 10 of these. And then the dark matter residue. This requires 320. But if you remember when we were looking at the quantum encoder, this has a byproduct of 80. Now the way this is going to work is there's actually going to be 2 of these quantum encoders for every one of these blueprints. So I can count on 160 being sent to here, but that only gives me half. And so that is what the first of the converters is for. And this is the fun monstrosity I came up with to fit 2 converters in here. I have to say, I really like the braided cable because it just looks so much cooler than just normal beams in my opinion. So I just suspended the converters, and that way it gives me the floor space right here to be able to do some load balancing that I'm going to need to do. And then as far as this first one, just making the dark matter residue, I need 80 reanimated SAM, and that'll get turned into 160 dark matter residue, and that's the other half that the particle accelerator requires. And then if we go up here to the second one, this one doesn't actually have any inputs because we're just making the excited photonic matter. This is making 160, and that's going to get split in between the 2 quantum encoders. And so if we come on this side, we can see all the fun pipe work. So excited photonic matter comes up here, and then one will go there, one will go there. Make a little bit more sense if I show you. This is how they'll get set on top. So let me just nudge it into place. So they are really long, but thankfully they're really not too wide. So each one will fit easily within a 3 foundation area. So I can fit 2 of these on top. I'm just going to need to extend the roof because this is going to overhang by quite a bit. So we're just going to do some custom building to finish off this blueprint. But I figured that's pretty easy. So excited photonic matter will get plugged in here and here. And then this one right here is going to be where the Ficsonium plugs in. So if we take a look down here, that is this one right here. So here we have the splitter. So one half goes to that side, the other half goes to that side, and this is where the Ficsonium is going to go. All right, so this is how the dark matter residue is going to go. I am going to have to do a little bit of freehand pipe work. I guess I could have created a second blueprint to plug onto the back that would already have the outputs, but I just think it'll be easier just to do it myself. I'll combine the output of both quantum encoders, and then that will get plugged into this pipe. And then this pipe will head on all the way down to the bottom here. And then I have this set up like this for a reason. The way Satisfactory works with pipeline junctions, when the pipeline junctions are flat, there's no priority. They're all basically equal. However, when you have it vertical like this, it will actually prioritize the lowest junction. So this has the main priority at the bottom, but I'm not using it. And then it's the middle horizontal ones. And then it's the very top one. So by setting it up like this, it'll always prioritize this pipe, which is the part that's coming from the quantum encoder. And at this point, we've all dealt with tons of byproducts in this game, so we all know if the byproduct backs up, then the whole thing shuts down. So by doing it this way, this will always get prioritized, meaning that this converter could be completely full, but it's always going to take from this pipe first. So in theory, it should never back up. And I've actually never had an issue when I set up pipes like this. It's really reliable. I think this might be the only blueprint that's not going on top of water extractors. So we do want to, I guess we can just switch it to blueprint auto connect at this point. Oh yeah, and since I decided to make these coated concrete, and it's a 6x6, it'll just snap right on top. And I was hoping, that's right. So this is coming out on the edge of these two. Because I brought it to the halfway mark, I know that this is basically as good of a turn as I'm gonna get. I think I'm going to do this basically for all of them, or maybe I'll just design the wall that's going to fit here so that I have this. Because now with this built, now it'll actually do the auto connect. It's a great little feature. I think it's so cool. And there we go. And so that is what it's going to look like. I'm sure the belt work isn't going to get totally chaotic or anything. That's 10 more particle accelerators and 20 converters in. And up top, we've got the 20 quantum encoders. Oh, this is going to look so cool when it's on. But I did have to extend it 3 more foundations. So it's 9 in total, which is a little bit longer than I wanted. Because now we're getting to just not quite enough space. Now, the tricky part is this whole thing, I could have brought it together just a little bit closer, but by and large, I kept it fairly compact. Now, what I could have done is, in some of these spots, I gave it 2 foundations, because I just figured that would be a good amount of space. I could run any of the belts that I need along here, and I won't have to stack them very high, and it just spaces things out just enough. But basically, I could have brought this closer together if I really wanted to. I just kind of wanted to separate each process by at least a little bit of a gap. But now that runs me into this next section where I just barely have enough space. And so the only way I have enough space is if I cut in a little bit, basically. So instead of this wall being able to come straight down, it's actually going to get a little bit interesting. But you know the drill. That's a future Moo problem. I just need to figure out how I can fit all these things in here, and then that's more of a design issue. It's like one of the last things I need to do. Alright, so for this next section, let's take a look at some more numbers. Each of these are going to output 4 Ficsonium Fuel Rods per minute. The burn rate at 100% would be 1 per minute. Since I'm going to overclock them all to 200%, that means 2 per minute. So essentially, each one of these quantum encoders can run 2 reactors at 200%. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to group these 2 together, and then I'm going to have a row of 4. Out of all the blueprints, this is probably the easiest one. So I'm going to do my usual and place all the water extractors just like I did for all of the other ones. And then it's just going to have a really small tower on this side because, well, there's no reason to make it any taller. I just need the water extractors, and then there's no waste, so don't need to group any of that up together. This is beautiful. I love the very end of this. Here's another 80 water extractors. and 40 more nuclear power plants. So I decided to at least kind of figure out what I was doing here, just because I really kind of needed to make sure that it all fit. And thankfully, because the power plants have that nice cool curve to them, it does miss this whole thing by a good bit, so didn't have to worry about any clipping. Got plenty of space. I mean, it is still a little tight, but good enough for me. And over here on this side, I was a little bit worried, but thankfully, because the first water extractors got pushed by just a bit, I didn't actually come that close to these rocks. So I didn't design these with the front wall because I figured this is at the very end of the factory. I can create a wall blueprint and use it on all 3 sides. Or maybe even all 4. I'm not sure how I'll separate this part of the factory with this part. And I think this is essentially all the machines I need, besides the drone boards to bring in everything. But for actual manufacturing, got them all in place. Thankfully, with the Blueprint Auto Connect, it saves me a ton of time, but there's still a decent amount I have left. So you would think that I would have tested this out before I placed, I don't know, 150 of these nuclear power plants. I just kind of assumed that I'd be able to get this to work. Horizontal to vertical? Oh, it doesn't. From either direction. And, well, I don't really like any of the other ones. You could do noodle, but I just don't like the way that looks. Well, that was definitely an oversight, wasn't it? The answer is always more blueprints. So I basically just have the reactor, and then I got it to have the curve right here. So the way that I did it, I took a wall, and then I nudged it to, I think, right here. So what I want is it to be 2 meters away from the center of this, right? 1, 2. So that's where I want it. And then I can take the pipeline wall support, and I can put it right here. That should be in line. And now horizontal to vertical works. Why? I don't know. Whatever. And then that's directly in line, so that's just a completely straight pipe. But obviously doing this for every single one would be really tedious and awful. So I'm just going to make blueprints for basically each of the different ones, and that way I can just have them already colored and everything. And then when I switch it to default auto connect, I just have to make sure it's in the right spot. Click it once, then I can lock it again. Make sure that everything is nice and straight. Looks good. And now the pipe has the look that I wanted. So is that something I should have checked out like tens of hours ago? Yeah, it probably is. But thankfully, it's really not that bad of a fix. I realize it may look like only a few colors have changed, but it's actually been 13 hours. Oh boy. Yeah, there was a little bit of belt work to do. I will say one of the huge advantages to this design is that I didn't have just miles and miles or kilometers and kilometers of pipes that I had to run across an entire biome or something. So at least I had that going for me. I was going to show off doing some of the belt work, but to be honest, a lot of it is super simple, and like I said, it took me so long to do. I figured it'd probably be best just to kind of highlight it once it's all done. So let's start with uranium. And I did finally run power through all of these, so at least now I can use my hover pack. So here we are on the bottom floor. We've got our water extractors, and these are already turned on and they're already backed up, because this is definitely the way to do it. I pretty much do this with any fluids, but when you're dealing with power plants, highly recommend pre-filling all the water. And so here's the load balancing for these 4 inputs. So since I color coded them, I can already tell this one's silica, this one's uranium, that one's sulfur, that one's the quick wire. For the manufacturers doing this step, there's 5 in each of these rows, and then there's the 3 rows. So basically this is just a 5-way split that's being done over like 60 foundations. Because I think that's how long this thing goes back. And at this point, I think I've gone over the 5-way split like a dozen or so times. But if you're curious, I have a short video dedicated on the channel for it. And that'll be what I'm referencing a lot. So this right here is where all of the products come in. Let me just punch a hole in the wall. Here is all of the belts. For each of these 3 rows, I have 7 inputs. The first 4 are going to this yellow one. And then the other 3 are coming up here. because the green manufacturers are getting their fourth input from the other manufacturer. And then this is just doing another 5-way split up here, doing pretty much the same thing. So thankfully I had plenty of space up here. This spot didn't get too tight. And that's the load balancing for the uranium, so all of these are done the exact same way. And here we have the first bit of the waste recycling. And most of the load balancing was done down here. Now, I thought I was going to have enough room in this front part, and I probably could have, especially if I brought this pipe like all the way to the wall and then kind of like back down sort of a thing. But instead, just to add more chaos, I decided to just bring them around the water extractor, and I'm still doing a 5-way split because there's 10 in total. So all of the products are coming in from right here, and then they go across this little bridge, and then we split it in half. So we go half over here, and then it does a 5-way split, and then half goes there, does the other 5-way. And so it looks super chaotic because a bunch of the belts are just being brought all the way around, but it's the same 5-way split that I'm doing everywhere else. But it does make the area look cool when there's just a whole bunch of items running around. Alright, so this one is the limestone because I'm doing the wet concrete. That's completely unnecessary, but that's what I'm sticking with. The sulfur for the sulfuric acid. This is the iron plates for the nitric acid. And then this one is for the packaged nitrogen. And that's how I'll load balance all of these packagers so that they all get the right amount. And then as far as the empty containers go, just like I said, they'll all go into this line of mergers. So they'll all get fed down and go this way. And then out here is where I'm going to place all of my drone ports. And drones are fantastic because they can handle both incoming and outgoing. So I can use the same drone port to handle both. You gotta love it. And then the last part. So this is where I'll need to plug in some more uranium. So basically from here, I can kind of bring that to either side and have it come out like a wall hole wherever I want. So I'll figure that out later. But that uranium is going to come up top here. And then I'm just load balancing it across 10, so it goes into a splitter in the middle, and then a 5-way split and a 5-way split. So up here, I didn't have as much space as I was hoping, so unfortunately I had to put these right next to each other, which I don't love, but it definitely works. You just need to be extra careful that you make sure you put the right belt in there, because if you don't, it can just be kind of hard to track down in my opinion. And I just like to see everything moving around, so I try not to hide it. And then we have the output of the non-fissile uranium. That's going to come all the way down to the bottom and head on over into this factory. So that heads on over here, comes up to this splitter, and then gets split in half. And that's going to feed the 2 particle accelerators. And then we just needed to do the load balancing for the aluminum casings. And so if we come right over here, this is where the aluminum casings are going to come in. And like I said, I just had this huge open space, so might as well just kind of use it. So I didn't bother making it super compact or anything. So we just did another 10-way split. So split it in half, 5-way, and a 5-way. And then I bet you'll never guess what I did on the other side for the pressure conversion cubes. So I did another 10-way split. I know, you're so surprised. But I did it differently. So instead of splitting it in half and doing a 5-way and a 5-way, I did a 5-way split, and then at the end of each of those, then it gets split in half. See, keep you all on your toes. And then just because the pressure conversion cubes, there's so few of them and they have such a long distance to travel, I just decided to make this initial belt a Mark IV just to kind of help them along. So they'll zip along a little bit faster than they normally would here. But in all honesty, the way that I'm going to start up this factory, it probably doesn't even matter. And so we have the output for the assemblers is just going to come along here, go up top to here, and then we're going to do a 4-way split. Because like I said, each one of these assemblers can feed 4 of the power plants. So we split it in half, come to here, here's half. One of the halves goes up to the one that's lifted up higher. And so that's why it looks a little bit different on this side. And then we have the other 2. And then it's just a mirrored setup basically on the other side. And then we have more waste. So that waste goes down here. And just like the other ones, it gets grouped up on a line of mergers. And then just comes over to here. And then here is where the plutonium waste goes. Into the Ficsonium factory. Plutonium waste heads on into the particle accelerator. The other requirement is the singularity cells, and so that is when I had to do some load balancing down here. And this is just the 10-way split where I split it in half, send half of it that way, do a 5-way split, and then the other half goes the other way. And I did the same thing on this side for the reanimated SAM. Originally, I thought if I lifted this up, that I would have enough space to figure out how to get 2 belts to kind of come in here. Maybe I would have to use some more lifts over here to give myself more space, but yeah, it ended up being just like way too crowded under here, even with just 1 belt. So what I should have done is lifted this up 1 more, and I could have done the load balancing for both the reanimated SAM for this converter, making the dark matter residue, and the singularity cells going to the particle accelerators, but I didn't do that. So instead, the reanimated SAM just comes right along here, and then we do the load balancing on the backside, which ended up working out pretty well, and it let me fill out this spot. So we've got the reanimated SAM going in here, halfway, 5-way split, and a 5-way split. And here's the load balancing up top. I played around with a bunch of different ways to do this, and I'm actually really happy with the way this turned out. So I basically just grouped these up in pairs up on top. This pipe is the excited photonic matter. This one is going to be the Ficsite trigons. This one is the electromagnetic control rods. And here's the Ficsonium. So to keep things kind of symmetrical, so that basically this is the second input in, this one's the third, that one's the third. That meant I needed to put the Ficsonium here. And then if I was going to put this one over here, well, I might as well just stretch it all the way back so I can see my cool IKEA lamps floating along here. So we've got them all paired up like that. And then underneath, it got a little interesting. So this one right here will be the trigons, and that'll be trigons. But I need so many that this actually is where I'm going to be bringing them in. So just use the cool new wall holes, and this is where I bring in all of the trigons. For the electromagnetic control rods, that one needed to get load balanced across all 20. So since they were already grouped up in pairs, I have those pairs come out, and then they get paired up. And so once they're in groups of 4, then I just needed to do that 5-way split. And so I decided to do the whole thing on the ceiling. And I made this Ficsonium ceiling a blueprint. And then that way it would kind of give me 2 things. It would spice up the factory, make it look a little bit different. It'd give me a place to put a few more signs because the factory can always use more signs. And it would give me this cool little height difference. So I can run the pipes along here. These are 2-meter foundations, which is basically the height of all of the belts and the pipes and everything that you need. It may not look it, but that is the difference in between like each of the conveyor ceiling mounts. They're all 2 meters apart from each other. And so that would give that spot to run the pipe, and then I could more easily run all of my belts along here. And then that way the belts are a little bit closer to the ceiling and not stacked down as far. And I just thought it would be kind of a better look. And it's just fun to try to play around with different new ideas. And then we have the final products. So like I mentioned, I'm just going to group 2 of them together. That's going to go into this lift and head on down to here. Go into this wall hole. And then we just do a 4-way split across the 4 power plants. So I know I could have just brought 2 individual belts down and done just a 2-way split and a 2-way split. And that would have saved me a merger and a splitter for each one of these little setups. But I'll be honest, I just wanted to show off some of the fuel rods. So my original idea was that I wanted to actually see the fuel rods go into the power plants. But then I realized to do that I would need to put them all the way out here. And they go through so few, you're still rarely ever going to actually see it on the belt. And so I opted to just keep it more in line and keep things a little bit neater up top on all of these ones. But for these ones, because I don't have to deal with the waste or anything like that, and I can just use up whatever space I want, I decided to just do the load balancing on top and just have the fuel rods kind of on display. Alright, so that is the bulk of this done, and that feels good. Now I need to figure out how to bring everything in, which is normally something I would do much sooner, but because I really wanted to make sure everything kind of fit where I wanted it to, I just didn't want to have to rebuild all of the drone ports, so I just wanted to avoid having to move them. So that is the next step. I have come up with a new blueprint, and I'm going to use these to import all of my items. So let me get this spun around, and we'll just place one right here for now. Alright, so let's take a look. So if we come inside, so I've got plenty of space in here to do my load balancing, because of course that's what I'm going to use it for. So the items will come in here, and I've got my storage container. I can do whatever kind of load balancing I need, and then underneath here, this is how they're going to get fueled. So I'm only going to have one drone port dedicated to the drone fuel, and then that way it's just going to run across all the drones, because they use so few, and I've spent a long time trying to think if you could load balance them, and I just don't think you really could, and I honestly just don't think it's a good idea either. So we're not going to. Fueling multiple drone ports is pretty much the only place I use manifolds, besides merging a whole bunch of things together. And that's how the drone port will get its rocket fuel. And then the other great part is, since I decided to lift it up, that means wherever the final output is, probably somewhere in the middle, so I don't know, somewhere around here. And then this is where the final product is going to come out. And then I can decide if I want it to go out whichever direction. And this is going to give me basically an extra little corridor to do some more either load balancing or just general belt work, getting it from one end to another, because I'm bringing in a whole bunch of items, and so I want to space them out across here. But I know the large majority of them are actually going to like the first two processes, because those ones just need so many more products. So I'm just going to need to do a little bit of load balancing to get the right amounts, and then it's just normal belt work, getting things from point A to point B and trying to make it look decent. 13 drone ports, and it actually fit really well in this area, so let me show you. I started with just putting it basically just right here, and then each one of these has a 2 foundation gap. Blueprint Auto Connect doesn't work for catwalks. I don't think anybody thought it would, but in case you were wondering, it sure doesn't. So it ended up working out perfectly that all of them could have a gap of 2, and then ended at the exact end. The only bummer is the entire center, I think, is about this point. It might not be actually, but at least what looks like the center of the whole factory, because of the way I built this thing, kind of looks like this. But this right here isn't centered with that, which is kind of unfortunate. I really wish that it was, but I kind of like that they all fit in this front area and have the same spacing. Someone who's better at design could have made this probably work better. But I'm pretty happy with this so far. And most importantly, I think it's going to be pretty functional. So now I just need to go through and name the different ones. I'm up to quite a few different drone ports. So what I think I'm going to do is make the very center one the one for fuel, and then have half the fuel go that way and then the other half go that way. And then what I'm basically going to do is pick whichever resources are needed first. Silica is only needed for these first 3 rows. So I can make this very first one the one for silica. That and the fact that silica is coming from like right over there, and so I'm not going to have any throughput issues. So I can actually just make it the farthest one and make it go to this corner. And then the sulfur I set up at the very beginning has 2 drone ports. So one of them will go right here and feed these 3. And then the other one will be farther down and it'll feed the next part where it's the recycling. And once I know which ones are going where, and then I'll know the amount that I need to load balance out of there, and then I can get that set up. I'll put a sink down here, and then I'm going to start testing the throughput. That should be easy enough, right? Back in the grassy fields at my electronics factory. Finally get to put a whole bunch of this to use. So the first one I set up was the electromagnetic control rods. So pretty easy load balancing to get these ones over here. Just needed 200, I'm making 240. The next one, I only need 12 crystal oscillators, so that really was pretty easy as well. And then pressure conversion cubes. I'm not actually making those here, but I am making radio control units. And over there on the west coast, I'm making the fuse modular frames that I need. And I just happen to have one extra drone port on this side. So I'm bringing the 16 fuse modular frames over by drone. And then those are just climbing up the side here. And then heading on over to just a little new addition that I made. You really don't need that many to make the pressure conversion cubes, especially when you overclock them. So these are overclocked to 200%, so each one will make 2. And that right there is the 16 pressure conversion cubes a minute that I need. And those are just going to head on over to the front of the factory, then go down and into that drone port. So eventually they will make their way over there. It's just a bit of a journey. That's why I wanted to take care of these first. I have a few more drone ports to set up. Next step is heading back out to the Rocky Desert, and I'll set up the drone for the singularity cells. But that one's super easy. I just need 160 out of the 200, so the load balancing for that is really easy. It's just, I bet you can guess, another 5-way split. So let's jump ahead and take a look at the nitrogen. Factory carts have never had a collision before. That's so interesting. Wait, did they fix themselves? It's still deadlocked? No. Whoa. Huh, that's so interesting. Well, Fixmas is still giving me gifts. So if we take a look at the map, this is where I am. So this is a really big nitrogen well, where I think it's putting out like 3,000 in total. So thankfully I don't need that much, and I only needed 3 packagers to deal with all of it. I think it's just about finished with the canisters that it had. But each one is going to intake 480, and it'll package 120. 480 times 3 is that 1440 total nitrogen gas that I'm looking for. So pretty simple. This is just built right on top of all of the nodes so that I can just bring these up, kind of group them how I need to, and it keeps them a little bit straighter. And since you don't have to worry about head lift with the nitrogen gas, it's just a super convenient way to deal with it. And so the packaged nitrogen gets grouped up together and goes right into the drone port. And then the drone port will bring back the empty canisters, and those will go into a buffer. And then we have the load balancing. Thankfully, going from 480 to 360 is really easy. You just need one Mark II belt, and there you go. There's your 360. So this is the one thing that's a little bit hard to test for the throughput. I mean, I could have a whole bunch of the industrial containers set up, and I could flush them a couple times and see how well the system runs, but it's kind of a pain. And that would probably be the smart thing to do. But based on the numbers, I don't think throughput is going to be an issue. Figuring out the right amount of empty fluid tanks so that the system has enough but doesn't get backed up in a weird way, because the way drones work, especially if you're using both ports, something you need to keep in mind is if a drone goes to drop something off and the drone port is full, it won't be able to leave until it drops off all of its cargo. Once it drops off the last stack that it has, then it's going to check to see if there's anything for it to take on the return trip to the other drone port. So you can kind of screw up the throughput if there's too much and it kind of gets stuck waiting. Just something to keep in mind when you're using drones. Only a couple last pieces to go. I'm finally using the pure SAM that's actually closest to the swamp here. Just right there. Completely overclocked, and then we've got the 4 constructors, and they're completely overclocked and summer slooped. So this will provide 600 reanimated SAM for me. So I just need to create a little housing and then a bus. And I'm gonna have the bus basically just come right out here and probably drop down to pretty close to the water level. And then it's gonna come right along here and then run right next to the Trigon Tower. So I'll have it run just right underneath here. Once it gets to this point, I'll have it plug into this merger right here. So right now this has 200, that'll bring in the extra 600, and this is the 800 that I need for that dark matter residue. So this is taking all my Trigons, the reanimated SAM, and the aluminum casing, which I'm just making in the basement of the train station. It only needed 3 constructors, so I just kind of threw them down there. And then we've got a new hypertube. So I decided to just add a junction right here. I might have to change it. I don't know. It's a little bit funky. Like, I get it because the Y just kind of makes the most sense. Kind of weird to incorporate, or at least I haven't found good ways to do it yet. Since everything I build is at 90-degree angles, the Y would be, 120 degrees? So I just haven't figured out quite a good way to lay it out yet. I'm looking forward to stealing somebody else's method, we'll put it that way. But that way from the train station, you can come over here, and then you could go over to the coke plant and that tower, or you can head on over this way, go over to the power plant. And because this side is just so much closer, I get to have a much shorter bus. This one is going to take the limestone that is from right over there. I finally get to use that node. The limestone, the rotors, the quick wire, and the iron plates are just going on a short bus just right over here. Obviously, we've got all the sinks running because this is just the easiest way to make sure it's all working. And because I hate the clipping so much, it just makes me want to delete them faster. And I've gotten started on a bit of the belt work over here. So like I said, for the most part, it's really just going from point A to point B and trying to make it look not bad. So this is pretty much the only load balancing I ended up having to do. Everything else is just connecting the 2 points. This one right here, I needed to do a little bit of load balancing because I needed to split it between the 3 rows. So for most products, like crystal oscillators, I'm only using 12, so obviously it all fits on one belt. And in fact, everything fits on one belt, except for the quick wire. For the quick wire, I have 1500, so it's easiest just to bring it in on 3 different belts. And so those come over here, and then basically it either goes into a splitter, and kind of gets split off. And basically no clipping, it just takes up a huge amount of space. But that's also because I spaced it out more than I needed to. And the reason why is I just like the way that this looks better. So that right there would have put it so basically the belts were touching. Like how they are when they're coming in right here, right? They're all just right next to each other. There's no gaps. But when you do that with the splitters, I didn't like that. I mean, it's fine. It just looks weird. So they're definitely spaced out more than they need to be by like an extra 2 meters or so. But I have the space, so why not? And then on this side, I just needed some short little lifts to kind of get it up and over so that there's no weird clipping. And then they're kind of plugged into the right spot. And it gives it a fun little pattern like this. On the other side, it's much more simple because everything is just in the right order already. So I'm on to the last bits here. I need to finish that reanimated SAM and get its bus plugged in over there. And then I need to set up the drone ports for the uranium and make sure that those are working fine. I'm going to get those up and running. And then while those are running, and I'll periodically check my drone ports and make sure the throughput is looking good on everything, I'm going to do my obligatory spend way too much time doing some more decorating. And then we'll just take a quick little overview tour before we turn this monstrosity on. The reanimated SAM now has its housing, and it's now got a bus. Oh, that green drone? Yeah, that's actually picking up uranium. And I went back and forth whether I should just use drones for both, or if I should just throw this uranium onto the bus. But I kind of wanted to just do the uranium all by drone, so I didn't have it on a bus just running through the entire biome. That's really the main reason. It needs to get grouped up with the 200 that's coming out of the Trigon Tower, so I figured it would just be easier just to belt it the whole way. And here I have the source of the bulk of my uranium. This is one of the 2 normal nodes that are in the world, and it just springs from the lake. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just doing the same trick as before. This is actually coming from a cave that's underneath the lake. And so I'm just doing the same thing where I'm just clipping it through the ceiling / floor. It's coming up into this, getting split in between 2, so each one of these drone ports is only handling 300. Since ore only stacks to 100, this is a little bit easier to deal with this way. And last but not least, this is the farthest one. I think I forgot to show where the other one was, but the other one is this drone port right here. So it's right on the edge of this lake. And to get into that cave, it's, I think the cave entrance is actually down here. Yeah, actually just follow that little river from the void, and it'll basically lead to it eventually. But now, I'm right above my home base, and I'm using this last impure node. This one is quite a bit farther than this one. I'll have this one clocked to 300, and this one is only going to be clocked to 200. Because for the 2 different processes, I need 600 for one and 500 for the other. So that's just going into one drone port here. And to power it, I mean, I'm really not that far from my home factory, so it seems silly not to just grab power from there. So I'm just using a power tower, connecting to this one, but I didn't want to just run a power tower all the way down there. That I thought would look funny. So instead, it's going into this power tower, which is then getting plugged into this little glass corridor here. which is getting its power from an elevator. So I figured might as well add it now, and hopefully it inspires me to make some other part of the factory look cool. I think they're a great way to move power up and down, and as far as functionality, it's pretty great being able to use them. And that's the uranium taken care of. Let's go ahead and take a tour of the factory. So I decided to switch out the glass foundations for just beams. I thought this was way cooler, and it gave me an excuse to add a whole bunch of streetlights. So the one benefit of not having the sky UI and having permanent daytime is I actually think about adding lights in places. So there's a whole bunch of streetlights that are just running right along this whole thing, and they're underneath each of these beams. So at night, this is actually really well lit. And it gave me a place to run the hypertube right on top. These are some really simple blueprints that I've made, where it's just a small concrete pillar, and then you just add some display signs to right in the middle of each one. And then the beam support, the new rounded concrete beam for this middle section, and then the same thing up top. I actually originally created this for all of these because I decided I wanted to switch it up, since I couldn't include the streetlights into this blueprint because this one goes to the very top of the blueprint designer. I needed to add something differently, and if I added streetlights on all of these, that would mean I would need to connect the power to all of them, which was fine on all of those because I could do the power ahead of time. And since I'm running the power through the floor, it was just going to be a huge pain to add the streetlights to all of these since I couldn't add them in the blueprint. And that's why I originally came up with that blueprint, and then I just kind of dual purposed it for the entrance right here. So I'm a big fan of the new rolling gates. I really like them. So I use them in a couple different places, and I try to add walkways in at least a number of places. And since this walkway is really long, going from one end all the way to the other, so I just use the H-beams for some supports, so it's not just a floating walkway for 60 foundations. And on the outside, I used a whole bunch of the walkways. And of course, I went ahead and made them blueprints because it just saves so much time when you're going to place a whole bunch of them. I went with the shelf beam for this outside edge because I really like the pattern. I think it looks cool. And then I decided to add a whole bunch of elevators because, like I said, I just really like them. And I think they're just a really cool way to get around. And then this way I can get from all of my different floors all the way up to the top floor. And for the most part, the factory should be more or less walkable. You do have to kind of go up and over conveyors because there's quite a few of them, but I like it. These are just the high barriers and the 4-meter signs. The trick is when you blueprint these, you have to place the sign first and then you clip the high barrier onto it. Because now once it's placed like this, I can't access the sign unless I delete the barrier. But it gives it a cool look. In places where I have the wall holes, I tried to dress it up, at least for the ones that are kind of front facing. There's a number of the ones that are kind of in the sides or going from one side to the other. I just decided to leave them out in the open because I wanted to see everything moving around. And for most of these sidewalls, I decided to just kind of pick a similar pattern, but usually I change the colors for some of them. So with this one, it's just a little bit different, but I just made blueprints so that I can easily place a whole bunch of these. And that way you can add just a little bit more detail than I would have if I was just going to zoop and zoop and zoop and zoop. Because if I was going to make a wall like that, it usually gets the bare minimum amount of detailing. And that's another reason I love blueprints. But I really like these new rounded concrete beams. I think they're really cool, and they like clip into each other really nicely. I like the way that they look. This looks a whole lot nicer than the way the normal beams kind of clip into each other. With most of the beams, I kind of feel like you have to use the connectors whenever there's a T-junction, or else they look funny. But these ones, because they're rounded, look great. Yeah, like on this side, if I delete it, you'll get some Z fighting, and it just doesn't look great. So I feel like you kind of have to use the beam connectors here. But now we've got more options, and I love it. And then with this section here, because there's a height difference of 4 foundations, I just basically added one huge window so that you can see the particle accelerators. Which was another reason I wanted to do this offset in height. I think the particle accelerators are cool. And then with the Ficsonium room, I decided to close it off. So obviously with up here, it was always going to have walls and windows. But down here, I decided to block it off from the water extractors. It just felt a little bit weird having just this gigantic room of water extractors and then just immediately going into this room with the particle accelerators. So I think it fits a little bit better, but this way you can still see them. And I learned this trick, which I think is just so cool. The regular braided cables, they are ever so slightly thinner in diameter than the wall is thick. So you can kind of clip them into the windows and stuff like this, and I'm sure people can come up with way cooler patterns than just making a simple X. But there you go, and I really look forward to what other people come up with, because I clearly lack imagination, but I still like it. So for the most part, between the walkways and the elevators, you should be able to traverse pretty much the whole factory. Or at least that's the idea. Alright, so for the startup, I'm kind of going old school in the fact that I'm just not going to use my priority power switches. I do really love that system, but as we've recently learned, they kind of mess with my power grid and my machines, and so I just don't want to have one around here. Instead, when it's time to send in a part to the factory, I'm either just going to completely delete the sink and the smart splitter, or what I'll do is I'm going to change this and say any, and then I'll say overflow going into the smart sink. Because to be honest, with this many different items, it's really hard to get it all timed right without having things back up. And so for a lot of the items, it's going to be easier just to send them into the factory, let them back up, and then once I get everything up and running, I can basically just kind of play with the smart splitter. And that's a really easy way to clear out basically the extra that you have on a belt. But I can show that off later. So for most of the items, they're being sunk just like right past the drone ports. But for some of the items, the crystal oscillators, the rotors, and the electromagnetic control rods, these ones are all being brought in a pretty slow amount. Since these items are all on Mark 1 belts, and this is actually a pretty decent journey until it reaches the middle of the factory. Actually, these ones are going the farthest, and this is where they plug into the factory. So it takes, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes to go from there all the way to here. So since the startup process already takes long enough, I decided just to add a couple more sinks up here to just speed things up a bit. Even though there is a good amount of daylight left, this startup process takes quite a while, so I'm actually going to wait for a brand new day, and then we can watch this thing come to life. There's one last thing we need to talk about before we get this started. Drones aren't as reliable as I need them to be. I'm pretty sure I had this issue before I added all these new drones. However, this has really amplified how often it happens. Sometimes they will freeze 10 to 20 minutes after loading the game, and then other times I've had them all run fine for over an hour. I put out a short video on this subject a week or so ago, and thank you so much for those that watched and clicked on the link to the post and even commented. I really appreciate it because I'm sorry to say, I think drones getting fixed is the only way I'm going to finish this playthrough. Thank you for all the suggestions you gave me in that video as well. To go over a couple quickly, trains would definitely be a good option, and I already have a good amount of infrastructure set up. I would just need to add some more. If we take a look at how many drones I'm using, it's a good amount, somewhere around 50 or 60. Out of all of these, there's probably only a handful of them that if they freeze, they won't completely crash my world. For better or for worse, my world is just so interconnected at this point. So I could certainly switch it all over to trains, but that's a lot. And there are a few factories where I've built the drone ports into the design, and I really like it. Another good idea was to run lifts down to underneath the map, so they're hidden, and I could run belts across it until it gets fixed. If I was going to spend the time on a workaround, it would probably be this. But I also see this being a whole lot easier and safer once I can use my fly mod again. And lastly, the one I wanted to mention is building up a good sized buffer on all the things drones are moving. I'm really glad this got brought up because it's something I've made a complete 180 on how I feel about from a few playthroughs ago. Buffers are absolutely necessary when doing certain things, such as trains, but I now prefer to almost never use them outside of that. I used to build them into all my fuel plants and get them filled up first, but it ended up just delaying the problem, and I would never notice it until it was too late. So now I like to use as little buffer as I need to so that I can diagnose problems quicker. Now, that being said, I went ahead and let my drones build up a buffer on all these materials. It's not a long-term solution, but as I said in the short video, I'm stubborn. I've spent over 60 hours on this project, and I want to see it turned on. This buffer will help me get through the whole startup process so I can do it all in one shot and have my silly little stopwatch in the corner. Now that it's a new day, let's finally get into it. Okay, so for the startup process, I am going to start by getting the Silica going because this is on the lowest speed belt and it's going to take a while to load balance across all 3 rows. Next step is getting rid of the smart splitters in each of the 3 rows so I can send all of these items that are on Mark 1 belts in. And I'll do it all at once, so what I can do is just use the dismantle feature and highlight everything and then delete it all in one go. Now that I've got those going, let's go ahead and send in the sulfur and the uranium. While I'm waiting for those to get a little bit farther, I'm going to go ahead and just get the pressure conversion cube sent in. Since each of the assemblers are only using like 0.8 a minute, it's going to take a very long time for those to ever back up. Even though the iron plates aren't used until the next section, they're on a fairly slow belt, so we're going to go ahead and send those in as well. Now that the silica, uranium, and sulfur have made it a decent distance, I'm going to go ahead and send in the quick wire. Now it's going to be a few minutes until the first fuel rods are actually produced because the cycle times for all these things are just pretty long. Because what I would prefer is for any of the waste to come through and immediately get recycled. And then for everything else, I'll just kind of play around with the smart splitters and the sinks so that the belts aren't stopping and starting later on. Means I also need to get the nitrogen gas started. So we'll get those packages sent in, and then as soon as they start getting unpackaged, the empty fluid tanks will get sent back. And there we go, the first uranium fuel rods. First bits of extra power, they're coming to life. Oh, it's so cool. Because the manufacturers output 3 at a time, but it's only feeding 2 machines, it is going to take a few cycles for these things to actually stay on at 100% to get the cycle times right. But that's okay, it'll all work out, it just takes a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and send in everything else basically to the factory with the same setup. So it's basically just going to fill up the lines and then stop, and I'll kind of clean things up after. But that way any of the waste will get recycled immediately and I'm not going to build up any of that. I think I probably missed the very first ones, but there's the first couple plutonium fuel rods. Next stage is about to get going. First plutonium power plants are getting turned on. All right, we've now crossed the 500,000 megawatt production. Heck yeah. There's the first Ficsonium. Oh, they're so cool looking. Does anyone else get the like Dyson sphere / hand grenade vibe? Or is that just me? And the first Ficsonium fuel rods are being burned. And now there's zero waste. Oh, this is just so cool. Okay. Yeah, we're getting up there. It's probably going to take a little bit longer to completely level out, but it's looking like these are staying on now. Alright, so we're getting close. Obviously, they're going to start and stop. So my thinking behind it is, as soon as I create waste, I want it getting processed. Even though they can stack up to 500, which is nice, I essentially just want that to be at the bare minimum inside machines. And that way, it'll keep the radiation down a whole lot. Alright, and that power grid is looking good. So I'll probably continue to see little dips like this for, I don't know, I would guess the next probably 30 minutes or so. Just because the cycle times on these machines are so long. For these ones, at 200%, I'm burning 2 a minute. So, you know, every 30 seconds it's getting one. But for these ones, even at 200%, it's only getting a fuel rod every 5 minutes. And the way everything is structured is, you know, the uranium has to be at 100% for it to create 100% of its waste. Once that's at 100%, then the plutonium can run at 100%, and so on and so forth. So since the cycle times are so long on everything, and if one of them needs to pause for a second, then it kind of throws it off and it has that trickle down effect. So it'll take a little bit for this to be completely at 100%. So I imagine this is probably already at like 98, 99% efficiency. Just gonna take a little while longer to get all the cycle times evened out, essentially. But it sure does look beautiful at night with these quantum encoders, doesn't it? Oh, I love these machines. So I did build 2 temporary oil power plants to get this whole thing up and running. So I am gonna tear those down. So my final production is gonna be a bit less, but that's okay. Now that it's nighttime, what I can do is start playing around with the smart splitters like I mentioned before. So what I like to do is just set it for any and any, and then you'll see quite a bit less on the belt, and you can kind of follow it back. It's going to go all the way over, and eventually we'll start to see less come up here. The waste is getting processed right away, and we're not building up any extra, which is just what I wanted to see. But right now, these lines have a little bit more than they need to. So the goal here is to kind of take out some of that. And there we can see, that's where it is. And once it gets to a certain point, like around there, I'll just go ahead and set the smart splitter back to what it was. And then I'll basically just go through all the different things just to kind of get that extra bit out of the lines, so that I can eliminate that stuttering on the belt and they all just flow nicely. Here it is, on at 100%, all cleaned up, no more sinks laying around. I deleted all of those oil power plants. The crater lake and the lake in the middle of the map are now just completely free. I've got all that extra oil I can play with. Without the oil power, it did drop a bit, so I'm now down to 1,098,390 megawatts. And you know what? I'm okay with that. My goal was to get over 1,000,000 megawatts, and I did it. And I'm really happy the way this all came together. It starts with just a whole bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet, and then you play around with them enough, you realize you can make some things pretty convenient numbers. Overclocking is great, but you don't have to do everything to 250%. You can make it into just really nice, convenient numbers, because sometimes being able to direct feed or put things in smaller groups to kind of feed into each other is just an easier way to do it, instead of grouping everything together and then re-splitting it up. I made quite a few, but if you guys are interested, let me know, and I can put together another folder in my Google Drive and throw a whole bunch of these blueprints in there, if any of you want to play around with them. So as happy as I am with this project, unfortunately that drone bug has driven me basically to my limit with this. It froze so many times, and unfortunately it's not the same one over and over again, and it even happened to multiple drones. So unfortunately, as cool as the power plant is, it won't actually run for very long. At this point, I don't think I could even play for an hour without seeing the power start to drop because one of these items froze and it's not getting enough anymore. And then it's just kind of a pain to fix, and it's just not worth it to me. So unfortunately, this is going to be the last episode of this playthrough until the drones get fixed, or the mods come back and I just really want to spend the time running belts underneath the world. So I'm most likely going to take a little bit of a breather, maybe put out a video or two on a different game, and if there's no fix on the horizon, then I'm sure I'll end up starting another playthrough. I really love the new elevators, so I'm probably going to lean into those in the next playthrough, something that has a lot of towers or something like that. But if you have any suggestions for themes or goals or anything else for that for the next playthrough, please leave them in the comments below. I'll look forward to those, and thanks for watching.